Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into Michael Celso's powerful series, The Void in Addiction.
Specifically, the volume Into the Void of Recovery.
Right. And our mission, it's pretty simple, really. Pull out maybe 3 or 4 core insights that can, completely rewire how you think about recovery.
And about that internal emptiness he focuses on.
Exactly.
Because that emptiness, that's really where Celso starts. He insists very strongly that addiction isn't some moral lapse, or just bad choices.
Right.
It's a profound, complex reaction to what he calls the void, this deep internal emptiness.
And where does that come from?
Well, he points to trauma, unmet emotional needs, even the isolation that modern society can foster.
Mm-hmm.
What's really interesting is how he blends things, his own lived experience, academic work, spiritual ideas, even neuroscience.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack Celso himself for a minute. His background is, well, it's not typical.
Not at all.
Largely self-taught for, 47 years?
Mm-hmm.
And he spent 4 decades, in high-performance equestrian sport. That seems key.
It absolutely is. That high-pressure world, observing people in that intense environment, that's where he saw the gap.
The gap.
Yeah, the chasm between, external success and actual internal fulfillment, or lack thereof.
Ah.
And that's why he argues addiction is basically a symptom. It's this desperate attempt to fill that void, that meaning deficit, especially when external stuff doesn't cut it.
Which led to his work now, with veterans.
Exactly. It evolved directly into his current work using equine-assisted programs for veterans and others in recovery, bridging trauma and healing.
Wait, hang on. 40 years with horses. How does that help veterans with trauma? Is it just discipline, or is there something more?
Oh, it's much deeper. For Celso, the horse is a vital therapeutic partner.
How so?
Well, think about it. Horses are prey animals, right?
All right.
They're incredibly sensitive to nonverbal cues, hyper-aware. So if you're internally chaotic, if that unresolved trauma, that void is active, the horse picks up on it instantly. It mirrors your anxiety, your lack of focus.
Wow. So immediate feedback.
Immediate, non-judgmental feedback. It essentially forces the person to find some internal coherence, some self-awareness right there in the moment. You have to address the chaos to connect with the animal.
That real-world application is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But Into the Void of Recovery, it also tackles the history, doesn't it? The misunderstandings.
Oh, absolutely. He has to dismantle that historical baggage first. For so long, addiction was seen purely as a character flaw, right?
Yeah.
A moral failing.
Definitely. Punitive.
Exactly. The book traces that evolution meticulously, how we moved, thankfully, from that punitive legacy and simplistic bad choice thinking towards today's more nuanced understanding.
Driven by science.
Driven largely by modern neuroscience and trauma-informed care, he details how that research basically invalidated those old judgmental approaches. It shifted the paradigm from moral failing to a medical and psychological issue.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me. He doesn't just stop at the science of the individual. He connects it to policy, to systems.
Precisely. He's not just diagnosing, he's calling for an overhaul.
Of treatment systems. Of societal attitudes, of policy.
Yeah.
The book analyzes that critical intersection, trauma, neuroscience, and the social environment. How they all interact in healing.
So what does recovery look like in his model?
It's about leveraging lived experience, fostering real connection, reducing stigma systemically. It's moving beyond just, not using, towards finding authentic self-awareness and meaning, intellect and empathy combined.
That's quite a synthesis. So ultimately, Celso sees addiction not as some kind of defect, but maybe more as a distorted reflection of a universal human search.
A search for wholeness, yeah.
Is it?
A response to suffering, a quest for meaning, however misguided the path becomes.
Which leaves us with a pretty challenging thought.
I think so. It's something for you, the listener, to really chew on after this. If addiction is, at its root, this search for meaning to fill an internal void, then how does our modern society so focused on quick fixes, external validation, maybe even superficial connections, how might it be unintentionally contributing to creating that very void Celso describes? That tension between wanting instant gratification versus finding genuine internal connection.
Exactly. Something to think about.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're looking at Michael Celso's book, The Void in Addiction, Into the Void of Recovery. You sent this one in. Curious about, what really drives that void in addiction?
Right. And our mission here is to really unpack Celso's core idea. That addiction isn't just, a bad habit. It's deeper.
Deeper how?
It involves the body, the mind, and maybe surprisingly, the spirit, too. It's a whole human experience he's talking about.
Okay. And he starts off strong, right? Trying to dismantle centuries of judging people. That's quite a goal.
It is. And he lays out how we got here, historically.
Does he give specifics? Like, how did we end up seeing it as a moral failing instead of, say, a health issue?
Oh, definitely. He points to things like prohibition, its legal fallout. That period really bakes the idea of moral weakness into the system.
So the default for ages was just weak character.
Pretty much. Punitive approaches were common.
So the big shift he's pushing for is stop seeing it as a failure of willpower and fully embrace it as a, complex medical thing.
Exactly. Moving towards science, towards understanding the brain and body. It took a long time to get away from just blaming people.
And that connects to the void, that feeling he talks about.
It does. And this is where it gets really interesting, how he connects the biology and the psychology.
How so?
He talks about the default mode network, the DMN, in the brain.
Okay, wait. For anyone listening, the DMN, that's the part involved in self-reflection,
Yeah.
thinking about ourselves, right?
That's the one. And his point is, if you've got underlying trauma or just intense distress, that DMN can be way too loud, hyperactive.
Like your inner monologue won't shut up.
Kind of, yeah. An unbearable internal noise. And substances, they can offer this temporary neurological off switch.
An escape from your own thoughts.
A powerful one. So the craving isn't just for the chemical high itself. It's maybe a desperate attempt to stop thinking so much or stop feeling that pain from the past. The void feels total.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. The biology and psychology are tangled together. The trauma creates the need for the chemical quiet.
Precisely. Which is why he argues recovery absolutely has to be trauma-informed. It needs to use what we know from neuroscience.
So address the original injury that made the void feel so bad, not just the substance use itself.
Exactly. But he also says, individual therapy isn't the whole picture if the world outside stays the same.
Right, the systems around the person. He gets into policy, doesn't he? He argues stigma gets, written into law.
He does. He says recovery needs us to rethink our systems because stigma often means exclusion, legally or socially.
So what kind of policy change is he talking about? What needs to shift?
A lot of it comes down to resources. Where does the money go?
Right.
He argues we need to move funding away from punishment, like jail, for minor drug offenses and put it into things that actually support people.
Like what?
Community housing, better mental health services, places where recovery is actually supported, not punished, addressing those social determinants of health.
That makes sense. And that brings us to his idea of wholeness, the path forward.
Yeah, the deeper healing. He frames addiction, maybe controversially, as part of a universal human search.
A search for what?
For meaning. For something more sustaining than the substance could ever be. It's about filling that void, that kind of existential vacuum.
Well, something real.
Something authentic, yeah. Through connection with others, through lived experience, through really knowing yourself, that's the spiritual dimension he brings in.
So this dive into Celso, it offers insight, maybe some hope too, especially if you've dealt with addiction yourself or someone you care about has.
Or even if you've just wondered about that, that quiet ache sometimes present in being human.
So let's bring it back to you, the listener. If Celso's right, if addiction is partly this deep human struggle, this attempt to maybe escape the self, how does really seeing it that way change what we think recovery even means?
What does successful long-term recovery look like then?
That's the big question Celso leaves us with, something to think about. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're looking at Michael Celso's book, The Void in Addiction, Into the Void of Recovery. Well, what really drives that void in addiction?
Right. And our mission here is to really unpack Celso's core idea. That addiction isn't just, a bad habit. It's deeper.
Deeper how?
It involves the body, the mind, and maybe surprisingly, the spirit, too. It's a whole human experience he's talking about.
Okay.
Today, we're really digging into something significant.
We are.
We're tracing the history of addiction treatment, drawing heavily from the insights in the void in addiction.
That's the plan. And it's quite a journey, because if you look way back, centuries back...
It wasn't about medicine at all, was it?
Not really, no. For the longest time, addiction was framed entirely as, a moral feeling.
A character flaw. Or spiritual weakness, maybe.
Exactly. And if that's your starting point, your treatment looks very different. It was often punitive.
So things like confinement, discipline,
Yeah.
moral lectures, that kind of thing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Not the kind of therapeutic setting you'd expect today. More like punishment.
And that kind of moral rigidity led to some massive societal swings, right? Like prohibition.
Oh, yeah. Prohibition in the early 20th century. The big experiment.
The idea being if you just remove the substance by law.
The problem disappears. Simple but deeply flawed thinking.
And the outcome was pretty much the opposite. A paradox, really.
Hugely paradoxical. One of history's classic unintended consequences. Instead of stopping use, it just drove it underground.
And that fueled
Organized crime. Think Al Capone, those big syndicates. Suddenly there were massive illegal profits to be made.
Wow. So trying to fix it legally actually made it more dangerous in some ways.
Absolutely, because now the supply was totally unregulated. People started consuming incredibly toxic stuff.
Like methanol, badly made alcohol.
Exactly. The source material points this out clearly, leading to new physical problems like blindness, paralysis, things completely separate from the initial substance issue.
So prohibition didn't just fail. It actually kind of cemented this link between addiction and crime in the public eye.
Tragically, yes. It really solidified that association.
Okay, so after that dramatic failure, things started to shift. Different paths emerged.
Right. You see two very distinct paths developing almost side by side. One was very human-focused.
You mean peer support?
That's it. The organic growth of mutual aid groups. The big one, of course, is Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, founded in 1935.
And their innovation was?
It was revolutionary, really.
Yeah.
An accessible system, non-professional, built entirely on shared experience, anonymity,
The power of the group.
the power of one alcoholic helping another. It was the total opposite of being locked up or punished.
Okay, so that's one path. What about the other, the more professional side?
Well, psychology started trying to get its arms around the problem, but even there they split,
Right. Two main schools of thought.
pretty much. You had psychoanalysis looking deep.
So Freudian ideas, unconscious conflicts, repressed trauma, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Addiction was just a symptom of something buried much deeper. Treatment meant digging all that up, restructuring the personality, often long, expensive work.
Aiming for a fundamental fix. And the other psychological approach.
Behaviorism. Completely different focus.
No deep dives into the past.
Nope. They saw addiction as, simply put, a bad habit, a maladaptive learned behavior reinforced by, conditioning.
Positive and negative reinforcement.
Right. And that led to interventions you could actually measure.
Like aversion therapy. Pairing the substance with something unpleasant.
That was one. And also contingency management, giving tangible rewards, like vouchers or small payments for staying clean, verified by tests.
So rewarding the positive behavior change directly.
Focused purely on changing the behavior itself.
Then comes another massive shift moving towards the medical model. Actually treating the physical body.
A really crucial step. Finally recognizing withdrawal, especially from alcohol, as a potentially dangerous medical event. It can be fatal.
Seizures, delirium tremens.
Serious stuff. And that's where benzodiazepines came in. Meds like Librium or Valium.
To manage those symptoms safely, prevent seizures.
Exactly. They made detoxification much, much safer. A huge practical step forward.
And then, sticking with the medical side, there was another revolution, particularly for opioids. You mentioned prohibition forced abstinence.
And failed spectacularly. Well, in the 1960s, methadone maintenance treatment, or MMT, came along.
Which was the opposite idea, wasn't it? Harm reduction.
Fundamentally, it challenged that long-held belief that immediate total abstinence was the only way.
So how does methadone work in that context?
It provides a stable medical alternative. It suppresses withdrawal, reduces cravings, and importantly, blocks the euphoric effects of other opioids, like heroin.
Allowing people to stabilize.
Yes, to get their lives back on track, find housing, work, deal with underlying issues without that constant, overwhelming physical drive of dependency. It was a paradigm shift towards managing the condition, not just demanding immediate purity.
So looking back at this whole story, it's a clear evolution, isn't it? From seeing it as a moral failing.
To understanding it, finally, as a chronic, relapsing brain disorder.
Something that needs complex, integrated care, medical, psychological, social.
Right. Professional approaches, peer support, medication.
Yeah.
All playing a role.
Okay, so let's bring this home for you, the listener. This journey shows incredible progress.
Stunning progress, really, when you map it out, but it's not like the story's over.
There's a lingering issue.
Definitely. Despite decades of science showing this is a health issue, a brain disorder, that old narrative, the moral failing one, it still casts a long shadow.
You mean stigma?
Exactly. The stigma attached to being labeled an addict is still incredibly powerful. It creates real systemic barriers for people trying to recover.
Barriers in finding work, housing. It was being accepted.
All of the above. So the provocative thought maybe is that true healing isn't just about treating the individual's brain chemistry or behaviors. It also requires us as a society to finally dismantle that lingering moral judgment and address the stigma itself. Okay, so today we're really digging into these sources, trying to map out this really crucial journey in how addiction treatment has changed over time. Our mission, if you will, is to see how we got from, well, basically moral judgment to the professional integrated care models we aim for now.
It's a massive shift, truly, for, centuries. The main way people understood addiction was pretty simple and pretty harsh. It was seen as a personal failing, right? A lack of willpower. Not really a complex health issue, just fundamentally a moral problem, a sin even.
And that viewpoint wasn't just academic. It had really tough consequences for anyone struggling. Early places people went for help, they weren't really about help. Think institutions, asylums almost.
Yeah, confinement.
Focused entirely on control, punishment, and sort of moral correction.
Right, enforced suffering, basically. The idea was discipline would fix it, which of course just piled on more shame, more stigma, awful stuff.
And that core belief that it's all about willpower, that's what made the whole cold turkey idea seem so appealing, maybe, culturally.
Definitely. It fits that narrative of, just toughing it out, sheer force of determination. But, well, we found out pretty quickly that approach is seriously flawed.
Flawed, and for you, the person going through it, potentially really dangerous, medically speaking.
Exactly. That was a hard lesson. For things like alcohol, benzodiazepines too, just stopping suddenly without support can be medically perilous. You're risking seizures, other severe complications. Those early institutional models failed for similar reasons. They focused only on external control, on forced abstinence.
Ignoring everything else going on.
Totally ignoring the deep biological changes in the brain, the psychological factors, the social environment. None of that was part of the picture then.
Okay, so if just punishing people didn't work, and just telling them to use willpower didn't work, where did things go next? This brings us to the mid-20th century, right? And these sort of competing psychological theories start to professionalize care.
Yes, and it's fascinating because they went in really different directions. You had psychoanalysis on one side. They saw addiction as like a symptom, a sign of deeper stuff, unconscious conflicts, maybe repressed memories, unresolved childhood things.
So the therapy was about digging all that up.
Right. Long-term therapy, trying to unearth these buried conflicts, aiming for this big personality restructuring, very inward-looking.
Okay, so psychoanalysis was all internal, deep-seated stuff.
Yeah.
What was the other major camp, the one focused just on habits, on what you could see?
That would be behaviorism. Completely different angle. They saw addiction simply as a learned behavior, just a bad habit that got reinforced.
Reinforced how?
Through conditioning. Positive reinforcement, like the substance feels good, or negative reinforcement, like using avoids withdrawal. It's all learned responses. And this led to very concrete, measurable techniques, things like aversion therapy, trying to create negative associations, or contingency management, basically rewarding abstinence with tangible things. Money, vouchers, privileges.
Okay, so you had the deep dive into the past with psychoanalysis and the focus on current actions and rewards with behaviorism. But neither one was the whole story, was it?
No, not at all. Both were pretty limited on their own. One ignored the immediate behavior, the other ignored the underlying history and biology.
And that realization that you couldn't just focus on one piece, that's what pushed the field towards integrating things, towards what we now call the biopsychosocial model.
Exactly. Integration became key. And that required bringing in medical expertise, real specialization. Pharmacology, for instance, made huge strides. We developed medications like benzodiazepines that could make alcohol withdrawal much, much safer, more manageable, less terrifying.
A huge relief, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And then for opioid addiction, you had the introduction of methadone maintenance treatment, or MMT. That was a real game changer. It shifted the focus towards stability, towards harm reduction, letting people stabilize their lives without that constant cycle of using and withdrawing.
So the medical side got much more sophisticated. And what about the talking therapies, the counseling aspect?
That professionalized too, alongside the medical advances. professional counselors became absolutely essential. They started using evidence-based approaches, things you probably hear about today, like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
Right, CBT focuses on changing those negative thought patterns and learned behaviors.
Precisely. And also motivational interviewing, or MI. That's more about helping people work through their own uncertainty, their ambivalence about making changes. Less confrontational, more collaborative.
So pulling it all together, the big shift, the main takeaway here, is moving away from looking for one single cure.
Yes.
And instead adopting this idea of addiction as a chronic disease, something that needs ongoing management.
That's it, exactly. Like managing diabetes or heart disease.
Yeah.
It requires comprehensive, ongoing support. You need the medical piece, the psychological piece, the social support piece, addressing the whole person long term.
It's quite a journey when you lay it out like that, from seeing it as condemnation, a moral failing, to understanding its complexity.
It really is. But, that leads to a pretty important question, something for you listening to think about. If our modern view is that addiction is this complex chronic disease needing comprehensive integrated care, why does that old legacy, that historical view of it as just a moral failing, still create such powerful barriers today? Why does that stigma still make it so hard for people to actually get the professional treatment and the resources they need for recovery? Something to mull over.
Today, we're really getting into Michael Celso's work, specifically his series, The Void in Addiction.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
It really is. We've got sources here that, blend his lived experience, some solid academic research, and, well, a kind of spiritual understanding, too.
All pointing towards this core idea about addiction, that maybe it's not what we usually think. It's about this emptiness.
His own path to this idea is, well, pretty unusual, right?
Totally. I mean, think about it. 47 years self-taught, learning through experience, actually through high-performance equestrian sport, long before he even stepped into a university setting.
Wow, 47 years.
Yeah. And it was only then in higher education that he really crystallized this question. What is the actual root of addiction?
And that led him to this big realization, didn't it? That the void he kept seeing, this deep emptiness in people, maybe even himself, it wasn't a curse or some kind of flaw. He started seeing it as, well, a calling.
Exactly, a calling. And that's really what we want to unpack for you today, why he frames it that way. Our goal is sort of synthesize his whole approach. It's holistic, trying to connect the dots between, intellect and empathy, science, and maybe something deeper, the soul, to really redefine recovery.
Okay, so let's start with the main idea. Celso is saying addiction isn't fundamentally a moral issue, like maybe we used to think.
Right, not a failing. He sees it as a symptom, like a really complex, often maladaptive response to this profound internal lack, this void.
So where does this void, this emptiness, actually come from, according to him?
Well, he points to a few things. Trauma is a big one, obviously, but also things like chronic unmet emotional needs, and societal pressures. The pressure to seem okay, seem whole when you're feeling fractured inside.
That constant feeling of needing to fill something.
Exactly, that relentless search. He suggests that's what drives the addictive behavior, trying to fill that gap, but, with the wrong things.
Okay, but here's a question. Framing it as this sort of universal search for wholeness, doesn't that make it a bit abstract? How does it connect back to, like, the practical side, the biology, the psychology of someone really suffering?
That's a fair point, and that's where he insists on grounding it. He merges his own insights, sure, but with the science, psychology, neuroscience, he's looking at the whole picture, biological roots, emotional wounds, and that existential piece.
So the calling is that basic human drive for meaning.
Right, and the addiction is just that drive getting misdirected. It's trying to answer the call, but with substances or behaviors that ultimately don't work. If you think about it, it kind of bridges the gap, between maybe the spiritual angle of 12-step programs and the more modern trauma-informed, brain-based approaches.
Interesting. Okay, so if emptiness is the starting point, that naturally leads us to recovery. His third book, Into the Void of Recovery. How does he map out this shift in how we've even thought about healing?
Well, he traces this huge historical shift from, seeing addiction as a weakness, a sin, something deserving punishment, that whole stigma towards where we are now or where we should be, which is embracing a medical understanding, integrating trauma-informed care, asking what happened to you instead of just what's wrong with you.
So it's this blend then, trauma awareness, neuroscience, understanding the social environment.
Exactly. And it all leads to this challenge he poses, really. He's asking society, asking us to see addiction not just as some isolated personal problem, but maybe as a reflection of a bigger human search, for connection, for meaning.
And he makes this practical too, right? You mentioned his
Yeah,
background.
absolutely. He draws directly on those 4 decades in equestrian sport. He now runs equine-assisted programs working with veterans, people in recovery.
Okay, hold on. Horses.
Yeah.
For people maybe unfamiliar, why bring horses into addiction recovery? What's the connection there?
It sounds maybe a little unusual at first, but the key is the feedback. Horses are prey animals, right?
Yeah.
So they're incredibly tuned in to nonverbal cues, to emotional states, to whether you're congruent.
Oh,
They
yeah.
react honestly to your internal state, not your words or the face you put on. So for someone dealing with deep trauma, the horse acts like this immediate, non-judgmental mirror.
A mirror for your internal regulation.
Exactly. It provides a safe space to practice self-awareness, connection, emotional regulation without the complexity or perceived judgment of human interaction. It's quite powerful.
So wrapping this up, what's the main takeaway for you listening? I think Celso's work really pushes us, doesn't it, to challenge stigma
Definitely.
and to see that maybe the most effective tools for healing are things we often shy away from. Our own lived experiences, real connection, and just radical self-awareness.
Yeah, and it's ultimately about more than just addiction statistics, I think. It really digs into what it means to be human. To suffer, yes, but also to find meaning. Maybe not in spite of that void, but somehow through navigating it. And the final thought he kind of leaves us wrestling with is this. Maybe finding wholeness isn't about finally filling the void and reaching some destination. Maybe it's the ongoing, lifelong process of learning to face it, integrate it, and live with it.